Okay, when I get the sign.
When you get the hand signal from Miles. Well, like if more people attended, I would, welcome people, but welcome.
I already feel welcome, so thank you for that.
And that's pretty much taken away, so.
Okay, are we close now, or? All right, well, welcome. I'm really happy to see the people in the room because when I got here at 6 o'clock, I thought, I'm going to be talking to an empty room. So thank you for coming out. Was it bad when you came in?
No, I'm just 2 minutes away. So.
Oh, well, that's good. That's convenient. Again, thank you for coming. My name is Mark Nepper, and I'm going to talk to you tonight about my novel, Glory Days in the Rearview. It came out a little more than a year and a half ago, and I'm still making the circuit, trying to talk about the book and do things that I can as far as author events. And one of the things I've realized is I really love doing this kind of thing. I love talking about books, and this gives me an opportunity to do that. A little background about me, very little, but there'll be a little bit more coming in a minute. I was a newspaper journalist for about 8 years out of college. And I went to UW-Madison. I worked at 3 different newspapers. So I really had a strong foundation in writing, and I always loved to write. But I also realized that that job was not going to be a career-long job. It was going to be something that was going to become a struggle. I started looking for other things that I could do. My parents were both teachers, and I thought, well, at least I'll be comfortable in the faculty lounge. That's a joke. You can laugh at that one. And so I went into teaching, but I also say to people that I went into the family business because my parents were teachers, my brother's a teacher, cousins are teachers, a couple of aunts are teachers. It really did feel like the family business. And when I got my teaching degree from UW again, I got hired by Madison and taught English at West High School in Madison for 30 years. One of the things that I always really loved doing was introducing a new novel or piece of literature to my students. And as I was getting ready to start doing these book talks, I thought, I want to do that with audiences. So you're my students tonight, and I'm going to introduce my novel to you. There will be a quiz after we're done. So you're ready. I've got some extra pens if you need them.
All right, let's go.
One of the things that I always did when I was introducing a novel is I would give a little bit of background about the author. I always thought that was important to establish a context for students, not because necessarily authors are bringing their own lives into the story, but sometimes they do. And sometimes just having a sense of what the author's life was like gives students some insight into what they might be doing and why they might be doing it in their novel. So here's a little bit about me. And I'm going way back, and there's a reason for this. That cute little tyke up there is me, I don't know, 1.5. But I show this picture because there are about 3 photos of me as a child. I didn't know about this photo and never saw it until about 7 years ago. Before my mom died, I said, what's the deal? She said, oh, you were the last one. We just got tired of that. Gee, thanks, Mom. So whenever I find a photo, it's celebration time. So I hope you like this one. There's another one, though, that I wanted to share. And I love this photo. I'm the little guy on the right as you're facing the screen. And I'm just so tickled to be in this picture. You can tell how happy I am. My brother's not quite so much. But the cool thing about this photo is we were all wearing these beautiful red sweaters. And that photo hung in our house for decades. As adults, we tried to recreate this photo as people do now. It didn't work, like they usually don't work. And then here is my senior class photo. And as I look at that, 2 things strike me. Man, I had a lot of hair then. What happened? And the other thing is, it was the fashion then to wear the brown or the velour sports coat. I was so excited when I got this brown velour sports coat. I thought, I'm it. This is it. But I share this photo because it will become relevant in just a couple of minutes in terms of what happens with the talk. When I got hired at West to teach English, I was the youngest English teacher in the department by at least a dozen years. There were a lot of teachers that got hired in the early 1970s and hadn't moved on, and they hired me, and the students were like, oh my God, there's a teacher who's younger. This is actually how they treated me. A couple of kids even called me Superman because they were just so happy that I could relate in a little bit of a way to their lives. This was glory. This is what came next. They started saying, oh my God, you look like George Costanza on Seinfeld. Did a big nosedive. And it's like, I like the other image better. So I always want to go back to the days when I was Superman. And then this is the author photo that I use for the book. And I share this because I really like the photo. My brother took the photo. He was a lifelong photographer and the photographer for the Milwaukee County Zoo. And the photo is in the book toward the back where they give some background on the author. But they forgot to give photo credit to my brother. So I want to make sure you understand that he took the photo. So about 10 years ago, on a Sunday, between grading papers and planning for the next day, because that's what teachers do, I was watching TV and the movie Ferris Bueller's Day Off came on. And I watched the movie. I always do because I think it's a fun lark. And kids love that movie. Kids still watch that movie. As I was watching the movie, it was really interesting because I got online, did a little bit of, Google research, and Ferris Bueller came out in 1986. And I thought, oh man, Ferris Bueller is middle-aged. And that thought stuck with me. Interestingly, coincidentally, today on the Today Show, they did a story about the movie coming out 40 years ago today. And they interviewed Matthew Broderick and Alan Ruck, two of the stars in the movie. I was like, well, that's timely, since I'm going to be talking about that concept tonight. So I'm watching the movie, and the question popped into my head. There's a little pic of the movie. But the question popped into my head, what is Ferris Bueller like at middle age? Because he would be middle age at that point. Next day I went into school and asked all of my classes this question. What would Ferris Bueller be like in middle age? They all had kind of universal answers. He would be so cool. He would have the best job in the world, live in a beautiful big house, have everything you want, to drive a fancy car. He would have a wife who was spectacular. Their kids would be like Garrison Keillor's kids in Lake Wobegon, above average. Everything in his life would be wonderful. And they went on, and I let them. And I smirked. And when they wound out of energy, I said, you know what? You're all wrong. Anybody who spent a lot of time around high school students might come to this conclusion that people sometimes like Ferris Bueller peaked in high school. And with that premise in mind, I'm thinking that changes the whole concept of Ferris Bueller, especially when you get to middle age. And so this date sticks out for me. This was March 13th of 2020. And essentially, that was the day my teaching career ended. I'd put in notice of retirement, and then on March 13th of 2020, I walked out of the building on a Friday afternoon and never walked back in that year. Everything shut down. And even in terms of retirement, I had 1 hour in the building to go get my stuff and clean out my files. So it was just kind of throwing everything out. But then everything I planned to do in retirement went away. I hope I wasn't quite as forlorn as this guy, but it might have been. And I know I was sitting there, and I'd go for walks and contemplate reality, but I kept thinking and going back to that question, what was Ferris Bueller like in middle age? And finally I thought, I'm going to try and write that story. So I really decided that was what I was going to do. And in my first year of retirement, that's essentially what I did. I wrote the first draft of the novel. Before I started writing, though, I sat down and wrote down some questions, because if I was going to write about Ferris Bueller, and I have to qualify that, this is not a continuation of Ferris Bueller. It's a very different character, just with that premise in mind. But if I was going to write about someone at middle age, I also had to flashback to what their lives were like in high school. And so I built the novel in the concept that in every chapter, there's going to be a flashback to high school. So these questions really helped me start to develop a framework, not that I wrote about my own life in high school, but I wanted to get into that mindset of high school and what was life like for a high school student. I also want the readers to get into that mindset, because as they're reading the book, I want them to be thinking about their own high school experiences. Like, Kara, you were talking about your principal, who used to be the football player and picked up students like they were footballs. Lyman, you and I were talking about fights and different things we did as teachers. Those become part of what was in my head as I was writing. So some questions that I considered, and my experience is that readers tell me this, they consider the same questions. What were you like in high school? And people start thinking back to those days in high school, and it's really kind of interesting to hear the stories that they come up with. In this moment, if I were to ask you, do you have a very specific high school memory? Could you say yes, and could you share that memory?
Sure, I'll share mine.
Go ahead. What is your name?
My name's Linda.
Linda,
I went to school in
thank you.
Central Illinois. I would have been a junior. I was dating someone in my math class, pre-calculus.
Did it all add up?
Yep, it did, but.
See what I did there?
But that's not the story. So in pre-calculus, the teacher knew that we were dating, as anybody did in high school. So anyway, I scored higher on the math test than he did. 2 points. Not a good scene. Because he wanted to look at my math paper, so I showed it to him. And he went through it and he found an error.
Oh, really?
I came up with the right answer, but I had an error. So a memory that really every time I think about high school, it comes there, because
And that comes up right away.
competition.
Yeah, that's funny, isn't it? And when I talk to people, that kind of thing, that kind of memory comes up all the time. Maybe not a math class memory,
Sure.
but a memory about high school. Lyman, does something come up for you?
Oh, I don't know, I was just thinking how, there's a million. I took a lifeguarding class. I wanted to be a lifeguard.
And you were from Racine.
Yeah, Racine Case High School. And in gym, they offered lifeguarding, and I went, okay, I can get a summer job as a lifeguard. I'm going to make this happen. And this was my junior year of high school, and the gym teacher, the Phi Ed teacher, a man named Jim Up the Grove, said, Lyman, you've really got a great stroke. Have you thought about going out for the swim team? And I said, Coach, nobody goes out for the swim team their senior year, right? Like everybody starts swimming when they're 5 and they go through clubs and all these things. He says, you stand a pretty good chance, based on your time trial, blah, blah, blah. So I went out. I was a varsity swimmer, and I was part of the medley relay that broke the school record. So like all of that from being recruited out of lifeguarding class. So there you go.
That's a fun story, and one you don't expect to hear very often either. Kara, how about you?
Yeah, well, a buddy of mine, he collected change at lunch for like a really long time, maybe a year, maybe 2 years. And we just assumed he was short on change and he wanted to get a cookie or something, chocolate milk, I don't know. Well, then one day, senior year, everyone was kind of in a tizzy and couldn't really figure out what was going on, but somebody had ordered a delivery of like 100 pounds of bananas, and my buddy, Ben, he told me, well, that's what I've been collecting for. And so that was his senior prank.
Oh, that was the prank.
He delivered a just so many bananas. And the high school, like, didn't know what to do. They're like, we thought this was, like, for the cafeteria, but, like, they didn't order it. Like, what do we do with these bananas?
So you all had a banana snack?
Yeah, pretty much. And then the Drosophila flies set in, so
Oh, yeah.
it was a whole thing, but that was a pretty fun and harmless prank that took a lot of planning. And he quietly, I don't think anybody knew who did it.
That's ingenious, I think, actually.
Unveiled Ben Abels.
The senior pranks, man, some interesting things come out of seniors. Some terrible things too, but some interesting things. There were a few things as I was doing this trip down memory lane before I was writing that I thought, oh, somehow I want to incorporate that. In my senior year, and we had a really good senior class, we had a commons area, and we did this thing that became huge. And I don't know how it started, but people would buy bags of M&Ms, and they would line them up on the table, and we'd have big competitions to see how many M&Ms you could suck into your mouth. We call it the M&M suck. It's like, you know, people
Why
would.
did you call it that?
I'm not quite sure where that came from. And people would, you know, put their hands behind their back, lean down, and start sucking M&Ms into their mouth like a vacuum cleaner. And I think the record was something like 27 M&Ms. We put a trail of M&Ms on our yearbook. And, you know, I see my friends who I went to school with, and they still laugh about that. Just one of those sort of bizarre things that happened in high school. And the cool thing is, once you start remembering, it leads to more memories and more stories. And I really had that experience, and I wrote a lot of them down. And then, having been a teacher for 30 years, I brought in a lot of those stories too in different ways. I changed things so that, you know, nobody was going to be embarrassed if they said that's me. Not that anybody's really said that. The next question was, who were your friends in high school? And if you stop and think about your friends, it's really interesting. At this time of year, last month and a half or so, teaching in a high school, a lot of seniors especially would say the things like, we're going to be friends forever, we'll never lose touch, we're always going to be in touch. Not so much. I keep in touch with 4 friends. We get together every year on Christmas Eve day and have lunch. And we've done it since we were 18. That's a rarity. But it was interesting, as I was writing this book, there's one friend, actually 2 friends, who could possibly see themselves in the book as shadows of characters. And one of my friends, I thought, boy, if he associates this with himself, he's not going to like me anymore. And I mentioned that to somebody, and she said, well, tell me more about him. And I did, and she said, he's not going to read the book. He hasn't. To this day, he has not. I don't think he's read a book since 7th grade, which is okay. But thinking about those friendships and all the crazy things you did with friends in high school and all the, you know, the ways you grew together and then grew apart are part of that high school life and part of that transition to life beyond high school. I thought about things that I did in school, things I did out of school. What did you do for clubs and activities? I made lists. What were you like in class? And I wrote this down, and then I liked it so much that I know I used it in the book because I thought, that's kind of cool. I was not popular in high school, but the popular kids would let me stand near them. I think that's funny. But this is what I used to do with my students. I'd cue them, okay, you can laugh now.
Well, I don't laugh because I know what you're saying.
You understand that?
Yeah, identify with it for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
So maybe it's not as funny as I think.
Well, I mean, it's funny, but it's like funny also like in a, wow, yeah, me too.
Realistic way?
Yeah, I don't know, I identify
I
with
never
that,
thought
yeah.
about it that way, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and I was never Ferris Bueller. I was never, the popular kid. My senior year, I did get involved in a lot of different activities, but I was sometimes popular adjacent, but not popular. This question, I think, is also one that becomes pertinent given the fact that I'm talking about a novel called Glory Days in the Rearview. Did you have your own glory days in high school? Lyman, you shared.
Yeah, sure.
A glory day.
There were other things that went sideways, though. I mean,
Yeah.
any girl I ever asked out never said yes, right? That's just kind of the way it went.
Yeah, and then you just sprang another memory for me. At my 10-year reunion, I'm dancing with this woman, and she said, "Why didn't you ever ask me out in high school?" What? And she said, "I was throwing myself at you, and you never asked me out." I said, "You should have thrown yourself harder because I didn't know." You find those things out at the reunion, and it's kind of like, oh, geez, well, can't go back. Another thing that's really significant when you talk about seniors in high school, and I saw this a lot teaching them, they are really thinking about what comes next. What is their life going to be like after high school? And it's exciting, and it's also really scary for a lot of seniors. Some kids have these detailed plans of what their life is going to be. Some kids really struggle with that. Some students struggle for a while before they figure it out. But that is a big part of that transition. And that led me to think about, in terms of my own life, and then as I'm writing this book, you made these plans. Did your life turn out the way you thought it would? And I think most people would probably say no, which is, I think that's realistic. In some ways, I think it might be a little bit sad too. So all of those things helped me get into a mindset to start writing. And, a lot of that dealt with that first statement. If I was writing this story, I knew there had to be a love interest in the story. And there had to be a love interest in those high school years, and then a love interest in middle age. That was something that was really important to me. And there's one other thing that I want to do here, because this was really, for me in terms of writing the novel, this was really significant. I have gone to book talks where authors will sit and read a chapter of their book, and I'm sorry, but I find that really boring. So I'm not going to do that. And I'm just patting the microphone, so there's probably all kinds of static there. But I'm going to read a little passage because this became really significant for me as I was writing. It involves the main character, Robb, his father, Bob, and then the main character's best friend, Cameron, or Cam. Cam called me that Friday at work and told me he would pick me up at 7:30. He wanted to do some research and needed my help. As an aside, I should say that I loved writing this character, Cameron. He was best friends with Robb in high school, always awkward, always sort of nerdish. He pursued a career in life that made him fun to write. He became a relationship and sex therapist. So you can imagine that there might have been some fun that I could have with that. Anyway, after I greeted Cam at the door, he ventured into the family room and sat down in the leather recliner beside my dad, Mom's reading chair. When she ventured into the family room, she would sit there and read while Dad watched TV. Sound as loud as a Who concert. But when I asked Mom once how she could concentrate on a book she was reading with all that noise, she smiled and said, "What noise?" I must have given her a quizzical look, and she said, "Robbie, I just like being with your father. I always have." Dad greeted Cam with an attempt at levity. "Robb tells me you're working tonight. What kinds of mating habits are we studying tonight? The lonely and desperate at strip clubs, or just the lonely intellectuals at a book reading at Barnes & Noble on a Friday night? Are you going to the latest teen exploitation or sexploitation flick at the Cineplex?" "No, nothing so exciting, Bob. I asked Robb to come with me to a new sports bar that seems to be all the rage, a place called Sidelines, the latest place where all the cool 20 and 30-somethings are going. So I need to go there. Robb is my cover. Never looks good for a single man in his late 30s, early 40s, okay, mid-40s, to be alone in a bar, reputed to be a pickup denizen. They might take me for a lech." Cam guffawed, so did Dad. "I'm afraid that is exactly what you are, son, and don't ever apologize for it. It has made you a very successful man. Be proud of your lechery," Dad said. One of my reviewers really loved that line. "Thank you for the compliment, sir," Cam said formally. "I can tell you how proud that makes me. My father will be tickled to hear of that praise, too." Cam and Dad laughed some more because they both knew that Cam would tell his father to make him just a little more uncomfortable with his son's chosen career. After a moment of pause, Cam said, "Bob, how are the days going for you?" Dad didn't say anything. He looked down at his hands that lay lifeless in his lap. The silence stretched beyond a minute. Cam, as a therapist, was an expert at waiting in silence. "Can't really say they're easy. Actually, the days get long. With both of us retired, we spent pretty much all of our time together. Now I have no one to talk to until Robb gets home. So all I do is sit here and think of Grace. I just find myself wishing I could talk to her. Not even about the big stuff. Just talk to her, you know?" Cam nodded. Dad stood and paced back and forth, but just for a moment. Then Cam stood in front of Dad with his arms spread. Dad stepped into Cam's embrace, and Cam just held him until Dad broke contact. Dad stared at Cam for a moment. Then he gently touched his cheek. "You're a good kid, Cam." Then Dad hugged Cam again. When they broke this time, Dad said, "Tell your old man I said that, too." And when I wrote that passage, and I didn't change anything, this was exactly as I wrote it, I paused and thought, wow, that's a really cool passage, and I think the father needs to play a much bigger role. And in the writing process, a lot of times interesting things happen, and this was one of those moments where a direction of the book changed dramatically because of that passage, and the father becomes wisdom and an anchor for people to move forward in their lives. And I just really love that passage. And I love what happens with the father too, so read the book.
There's a lot of man stuff there, a lot of dad stuff, a lot of like, I don't mean to narrow it down, but like, it's very rich.
Thank you.
In its emotion.
Yeah, and that was something that surprised me too, because I didn't know where that passage was going to go. And at that point also, and this happens, and other writers talk about this, the story took over. And then I just started managing the story. You know, I did some tweaking and direction here and there, but the characters and story really took over. And that was really spectacularly fun. And I couldn't be away from it for a day or two because I had to get back to my characters. I had to tend to them. I share this image just because I taught this novel, All the King's Men, by Robert Penn Warren. And to me, it's the great American novel. And I used to always tell my kids, if you say anything bad about this, I will kill you. I said it with a smile, and they laughed. And I made a big production out of giving the book out. I put it under like a purple tablecloth so it looked like it was an altar set up. And I would wear a graduation robe, and I lit candles, and I had them get their phones out and swirl their flashlights at me. So it was a big production, and told them that reading this book would change their lives, and they had to come up and genuflect before the altar before I would give them a book. There are YouTube videos that still exist of this. But I share this because this is what I aspire to. This is the kind of rich novel that I want to get to. I'm not saying that my novel does that, but maybe the one I'm working on now just might. I'm hoping anyway. But that's, as a writer and as a teacher, for me, this is the kind of goal I want to attain. So I read a little passage, but I want to share a few quotes from the novel as well. They're quotes that I think have depth to them. People will do stupid, hurtful things. Don't be one of those people. Seems simple, but I think there's a lot to that. She showered people with kindness and love for only one reason, because that's how you should treat people. That was a quote about the mother. Relationship advice, and this came from Cam, the relationship counselor. Keep trying, be romantic, Be attentive, be empathetic, be kind when you find it most difficult. Be present in the marriage even when you can't figure out why. Stick with it. Because I brought the father figure into the story more, he played a bigger role in terms of shaping his son by teaching him how to live life and gave him advice. Dad's instructions gave me insights into how to complete certain jobs I would find myself doing as an adult. The instructions also served as primers for how to live life. And I think that's also something that's really significant that parents do. Another thing that I would do with my students is I would give them a list of some of the characters who are going to play a primary role, characters they would have to know and understand. Protagonist in the story is Robb Cesario. The high school love interest is Amy. The best friend is Cameron, as I mentioned. Bob Cesario, the father, plays a role. And then TJ is a high school son when we see Robb Cesario in middle age. And then Jesse is a freshman in high school, his daughter. And they both will end up playing a significant role later in the novel. There are certain themes that come up, and I always like to talk about themes because that elevates the story. If you can give readers something that they can take away and say, this is a message about how to live life, you've given them something of depth. In hard times, lean on your friends, and I have done that my whole life. And my friends have tried to be there for me. They haven't always done a good job, but they've tried to be there for me. They're good friends. Make the most of second chances. Don't waste them. Family can challenge and redeem. And I think that is also something in my life that I found significant. There has been an interesting thing that has happened, in part because of the nature of the story. A lot of people think it is a story about my life. It's not. It's a story about a character. Like many authors, I might draw on my life experiences, but it's not a story about me. And that is something that I usually try to clarify and talk about for a moment, because I want people to know that this is a fictional work. This is a character I've created to tell the story and to transfer or allow a point to be made. This is one of my friends from high school, and he said this to me, and I thought, wow, that's really pretty interesting and also kind of sad. I think I see myself there in a few chapters. If I would have read this book 5 years ago, I would still be married. And he was serious about it too. I talked to him a lot about that after he said it, and it was just really interesting, the things he said and the comparisons and connections he made to the book and to our time together. I don't have this quote up in my slides, but I was talking with another friend who read the book, and he was a really good friend in college. We talked about the book and different things I did, and then he said, Nepp, and that was my nickname in college, I never thought you had that kind of depth in you. It's like, gee, thanks.
Is that a compliment or a cut? How does that go?
Exactly. Wasn't quite sure how to take that. This woman, Megan, gave me this quote. This book gave me all the feels. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? And she said, well, I'd be reading it at night before I fell asleep. I'd be laughing, and my husband would say, what's so funny? And I would tell him about these moments in the book. And then there were times when I would just sob. And I said, why? Was the writing that bad? And she said, no, you made me feel these emotions that I never expected to feel reading this book. And I took that as a big compliment too. This was from another reader, an entertaining read in Glory Days. Mark definitely captures the many emotions of his characters. His writing had me rooting for Robb almost from page one. Another quote, and Carrie, you can correct me on this, but these kinds of endorsements actually help sell books, don't they? That's what I've heard anyway. Glory Days reminds us of the power of true love, The unbreakable bond of family. It will also have you walking down the halls of your high school again. This is from John Stofflet, who used to be the anchor of Channel 15 here in town. Thought I'd get someone famous in there. One of the things that's been really interesting as I have gone about this process of learning how to deal with trying to promote a book and sell a copy of a book here and there, it's very different now. And I love doing these kinds of things like book talks, and I've done book signings. I've done some events where I've met with book clubs that have read my book, and that's been really fun too. But to sell books, it's all about social media now. And I don't know a lot about social media. So I've tried different things. I've run ads. I thought this was a pretty clever Christmas ad, and I put this book under a Christmas tree, took a picture, a great gift for the reader on your list. I might have sold 2 books out of that ad. Ads of people reading the book. I had one ad of someone in an airport in Honolulu reading my book. And my catch line was, people all over the world are reading this book. I thought that was good too. But it was, mostly hit. It was hit or miss, and it was mostly miss. There are some people who are really effective at using social media, but to really catch fire, you have to do something almost every day. And I just, I didn't do it. I truthfully didn't want to do that. So, it's been a really big learning experience for me, trying to do things that would promote the book. These are the things I enjoy the most, connecting with people who might read the book or just are interested in books and reading in general. So a little promotional thing I do put out in different places, just a little postcard to give people some information, and a QR code. They can scan the QR code and it takes you right to the publisher. You can buy a copy of the book. So that's all advertising. So I really appreciate you being here and listening to me ramble on. I hope it's been entertaining, and I would be happy to answer questions if you have some.
How long did it take you to write?
That's an interesting question because it gets to the process. And I did, in that first year of COVID, sit down and write, and it took about a year to bang out a rough draft. And then I set it aside. I mean, it was on my computer, but in my mind, I set it aside and didn't really touch it for probably 2 years. And I thought, I should do something with that. And I went back in, and then I started doing the hard work. Writing the rough draft was just fun. This was really fun. Editing was the hard work, because then I had to try and find ways to make sure the story worked, the story flowed, the character wouldn't say this at this point, this doesn't make any sense. And so hard editing was another full year. Then I found a couple readers and I said, and by that point I've done like 8 or 9 drafts. Can you just read this and tell me if I should pursue it or should I just be done with it? And they both said, no, try to get it out there and try and publish it. And I was fortunate to be able to connect with Little Creek Press, a local publisher out of Mineral Point, and they agreed to publish the novel. There were interesting things that happened with that. We went round and round on the title of the book. The publisher kept saying, I want to call this Madness in Mad City. And I said, no. And she said, yes. And I said, no. First of all, if you live in Madison, you don't call it Mad City. Nobody does. And it's not madness. It's maybe confusion, but it's not madness. That has a very hard connotation. And I had come up with Glory Days in the Rearview, and I really like that. I was saying to Kara before that it connects to that Bruce Springsteen song, Glory Days. And I like that concept. And after, we had 2 or 3 different conversations, and on the 3rd day I said, do I have any say in this? And she said, well, yeah, it's your book. I said, then we're going with Glory Days. And she said, okay. And then she...
It's more universal, too. Like everybody has that, I think,
yeah.
Right?
And you can relate to that. And if you think about the concept of Springsteen's song, it's people who are so wrapped up in those glory days that they have trouble moving on. And that is an issue, too, for some people who seem to have it all and then have lost it all, too. Another thing that was interesting is working with the editor. I'm writing about high school students at times in the flashbacks. And Lyman, you might back me up on this. I think high school students drink once in a while. And my editor could not, for the life of her, understand that. These are high school kids. How do they keep getting alcohol? Well, and
They put water in Dad's whiskey bottle and they siphon a little bit out.
and a little bit of tea, and she really had trouble with that. And finally, I said, well, they have fake IDs or they have an older sibling by, and she said, well, nobody drinks that much. I said, what did you do in high school? And she said, well, I read books.
Of course you did.
Yes. But we worked through those things, and she offered some good suggestions, and that's one of the things you also have to learn how to do when you're putting your work out there is accept what people might be saying that is not necessarily praiseworthy or positive, and figure out how to deal with that. So it's been a rich learning experience for me, and it's been really enjoyable. People ask me this question a lot. Where are you with the next novel? Are you writing another one? And I am. It's a small room, and I'll share the opening line with you. The men in my family have a tendency to murder their wives. That's the opening line of the next one. So I'm working on that.
So I don't mean to drag you back into this one.
Please do.
But so one of my, and this is silly, but one of my favorite Sesame Street characters, you might remember him, is Don Music. And Kermit the Frog would always interview him. And I'm here with Don Music, and he'd, Mary had a little lamb, and he'd forget the last line, oh, I'm terrible, and he'd smash his head on the piano. I can't stand it, I can't proceed. Have you had any Don Music moments during, how many Don Music moments have you had where you just went, this is terrible, I can't do this anymore, and just, how did you wrestle with those frustrations? How did you get out of them and come back to the work? That's a lot of questions, I'm sorry. Just ready, set, action.
When you first brought that up, I thought immediately of what happened with the ending of the book, because I didn't know how to end it. I got to a point I thought, I need to end the story. And I get really angry with authors who don't end their work. Really angry. Phenomenal novel, Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. I'm reading the novel, it's like 900 pages long, 50 pages away, I'm thinking, okay, how's he gonna end this? 10 pages away, I'm thinking, he doesn't have an ending. 2 pages away, he introduces something completely new. And I finished reading the book, and I was so mad because he didn't end it. I took it, and I threw it across the room as hard as I could, and then was immediately chagrined by it because it hit a picture on the wall. Picture fell to the floor, and the glass shattered all over the place, and I had shards of glass in my face. So I'm like, well, I'm not going to do that. But I didn't have an ending. And it was probably 6 weeks, almost 2 months, as I just was like, where do I go? Which direction do I go? And one morning I was out for a walk, and it hit me like, this is it. This is what you have to do. And, I got home after about 10 minutes. I shortened my walk, and I sat down and I wrote the final chapter of 8 or 10 pages in about 35 minutes.
But the mental rehearsal had all been done by that point.
Yeah, but up to that point, I was beating my head on the table, thinking I can't do this. I can't end this book. So I definitely had that kind of moment.
You mentioned something earlier about how characters take over the story in the writing, which I think is an interesting concept because you are the writer.
Yep.
You wrote the characters. So then how do the characters become controlling you as to what you write? So it's puzzling to me because I'm not obviously.
Linda, that's a great question. But you did create the characters, and then it's almost like you're raising a child at graduation. You send them out into the world. These characters sort of take a life of their own. Like I would want my character to go in this direction, and character wouldn't let me. Something in my subconscious was saying the character needs to go in a different direction. And it would, I might have been trying to make the character do something the character wouldn't do or was out of character. And the character, and I'm saying the character wouldn't let me, but in the writing process, I had to stop and say, okay, what do I do here? Does that answer your question?
I mean, I can envision like a board now, because now the murder's coming up. So here's all your characters up here, and you kind of going down this path. So I just envision a lot of Post-it notes, because I'm very visual.
Yeah.
So Robb is doing this, this, and this, but over here, and then where's that line go to, and how do they connect? So how do you do that when you're writing? Is it?
That's what you do.
Outline, but it seems to be.
Yeah, and my outlines were, each chapter I would write 2 or 3 words. This is what I want to do in this chapter, this chapter. But you connect the line when you go back and do the editing.
When the edit.
Yeah, and then you work through some of those things where it seems like you're going way off on a tangent. And sometimes you just have to be really brutal with your writing and say, that doesn't work. And then you have to delete. And there were times I would delete 5 or 10 pages and cry because it's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work, but you had to do that work to get it back in the direction that you wanted it.
Yep.
Which I think kind of follows with the question I was talking about. You already answered the second one, is looking at when you went to write the book, so you knew what characters you had, their themes, but did that happen before you started? Did you have your themes in mind, or did they also come in as you started writing and you realized, oh, this is a theme that I've got?
There were a couple of things I thought I wanted to try with the book, and then you can have a lot of themes in a novel. Others emerged as I was writing. And then when I would identify a possible theme, I would try to find a way to accentuate that. I have some symbolism in this book. I don't overload it, but symbolism I added in subsequent drafts. Because I would be editing and I'd come to a moment and think, I can do more with this. And then I would bring it back again and again. And then it became an important part of the story without me overemphasizing it. Are there other questions?
So Mark, sorry, I'm going to keep you here, man. We often work with our students, and we encourage them to write with a purpose in mind, or write with an audience in mind, right? Like with an end in mind, etc. And I think it's one thing to sit down as an undergrad or a master's degree student, or even as somebody who's journaling in their own personal life, and hammer out 5 pages, 10 pages, 20 pages, 50 pages of a master's thesis, whatever. Writing with a book in mind, the formatting, the size of a chapter, the spacing of the words, how they're justified on the page, your overall page length. What do we have here? Almost 300 pages, 300, I didn't look, I'm guessing.
250.
Okay, there we go. To what degree do, and extent, do the mechanics and those kinds of considerations govern your writing or steer your writing, or do you just go and make it someone else's problem? And that's what editors are for. How did you approach all of that?
Purpose is, for me, as you mentioned, it's probably the most important part of writing. And I sat down with the purpose of telling the story about someone at middle age who had been the glory boy in high school. But I didn't, have everything identified, but I knew the basic outline of the story I wanted to tell. And then had a sense of how long I would want this novel to be. But in the first draft, and I keep going back to that, I just let it fly and didn't really worry about containing myself or keeping it to a word limit or page length. I knew that would come in the editing process, and I need to keep stressing that for myself because the editing process is really important. And so a lot of those things, once I had a draft, I could go back and say, now this is what I need to do for my purpose. This is what I need to do for the structure of the novel. My manuscript was 400 pages long. And I didn't have a clear sense. I had some idea that what that would translate to in book form. And when I hit that 400 page limit, I thought, okay, that's probably enough. It's going to be 250 to 280. I came in around 250. Those things were in my mind when I was in that final editing stage.
Okay. That's oftentimes our advice to national board candidates as they're writing their portfolios. Don't worry about the page limits. Don't worry about the bumpers. Just let it fly. Get all your ideas out. Pour it into your initial draft. And worry about paring things down and using surgical language and all the things later. So, it mirrors that process a little bit, it sounds like.
Yeah, and writing is all those things together. If you just wrote a rough draft and then gave it to the editors and said, do what you will with it, I think you've abdicated your responsibility.
You'd have bad count.
You'd have bad town madness or whatever.
Yes, yes, that's what it would be.
So how did you and maybe this is me being really naive, but how did you understand how to format your writing for a book so that it was so that it had a softer landing on the editor's desk? How did you navigate that? How did you understand word counts and page structures? And this chapter is only 3 pages and this one's 15. How do you balance all those things out while you're preparing to publish?
Well, and that gets to some of the things I would teach my students. Don't get into a rut where every sentence you write is the same sentence pattern. Vary things. So I would do that with chapters. Last chapter was longer. This chapter is going to be shorter. Some of that was intentional.
Okay.
Trying to make sure that there weren't patterns. In retirement, I've been learning how to watercolor through online watercolor courses. And the instructor, and I have found one I really like, says, do this, but this is nature. So avoid the pattern because there's not a pattern there. And that's something that I think applies to writing as well. There will be some pattern making, but you try to break the pattern too. So in terms of the artist, the writer, that's in my mind. Does that get close to answering?
Yeah, it kind of picks at it,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cool. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question. So, correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like you really, like Robb, your character really became like a friend of yours, or like someone, it was like you were in conversation with them, and you talked with him every day as you were writing this story. And then you finished your draft, and then a couple years go by. And I wondered if in that couple years as it went by, if you was like, oh, Robb, I wonder what he would think, or like how that conversation happened. Or were you like, oh, I'm tired of thinking about this, I'm ready to move on to something else? I mean, I know in COVID, it was like, everybody got tired of their sourdough that they started.
Yes.
We're done with this now.
That was a big thing in COVID.
Mine rotted on the counter after I forgot about it once. But yeah, so I want to know more about your relationship with these friends you made up.
And that's a really interesting question too, because you've created this and you do start to think of them as important people in your life, even though they're imaginary. And when I finished, I set it aside, thought, okay. And then there would be times where the characters would pop into my head again. And I think, oh yeah, I should probably get back to that at some point. But for me, that had to happen when I was ready for it to happen. And I think if I would have done it too soon, I probably would have struggled with it, would have hit the points where I'm beating my head on the table. So there definitely was that part of it. Since I've been, since the book is out, I haven't had the thought like I want to go back and write more about this character. That came to me like, okay, now I'm done with this. Some people are never able to be done with their writing, and that's why they end up with a manuscript that's 1,000 pages. I know someone, friend of the family, who was a social worker and decided he had to write a novel about his life as a social worker. And it is 800 pages long, and nobody will publish it, and he can't understand why. And I didn't say this to him, but I always say it to my students. You, as a writer, you have to make choices. And he didn't make any choices. So, in terms of my writing and the characters, at some point I have to say, okay, that's as much as I can do with them. And my choice is to then be done with them.
That's interesting, like the finality of that. As somebody who's published or recorded music, oftentimes, you send it out into the world and it survives. It sputters along. It's been 30 years since I've recorded anything. And that stuff bounces back and I go, oh, I wish I would have done it this way or this way or this way. Or we should have really gone back and filled this in a different way. Like once you hit send, it's out there. It's got a life of its own, right?
Yeah, and sometimes you just have to accept that's where you were at that point.
Yeah.
And you might go back and look at it and say, you know what, that's pretty good. I found that experience too.
Very good, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming. I appreciate you spending time with me and letting me talk about my book. Thank you. Can I take this off?